Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. We are felling to have personality, chef, social media chef Jake Cohen with us tonight. Uh, he has inspired a huge interest within his online network, and now I am seeing him on my feed almost every night. So, as a Jewish mother, I'm felling, and as I'm sitting here now with his book, with my very own copy. I thank you. Okay, so I'm sure you've seen Jake on the cover of Hadassah magazine, and he's been appearing on many, many other places to talk about his new cookbook, Jewish Reinvented Recipes from a Modern Mensch. I want to add that we are giving away signed copies of Jake's book with a donation of $100 or more this evening. So you can make a tax-deductible contribution to HMTC and get an autographed copy of Jake's book. Let's get back to Jake. Although he's been blowing up our newsfeed and we've seen his gorgeous face everywhere, we need to tell you that Jake is actually a very well-trained chef. He studied at the CIA and he's worked at New York institutions such as Restaurant Daniel and ABC Kitchen. And he transitioned out of the restaurants and into food media, first at Sava magazine, where he headed up recipe testing in their test kitchen, and later as food editor of tastingtable.com, the food critic for Time Out magazine, New York. He now spends his days speaking and cooking, which he shares for the first time with his new cookbook, Jewish. Tonight he is demonstrating a recipe that is both timely, coming just a week before Passover, and connected to our European Jewish culture that HMTC seeks to remember and draw attention to. As I like to tell people, Judaism is a portable suitcase of language, culture, tradition, and yes, food. And Jake's book has brought together all of our cultures, all of our traditions as a nomadic people to show us that our foods have spanned the generations of wandering. He will be baking his great-great-aunt Lotte's recipe for Passover Kosher meringue. And as Jake describes in his cookbook, that he did not know of his grandmother's Holocaust background until 2019 after she had passed away. So at this point, I would like to turn the stage over to Jake. And we are very happy that Jake saved his great-great-aunt Lottie's recipe, and he's here to show it to you today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Hello, hello. So very excited to be here today. Very excited to be talking about the book. And obviously Passover's coming up. We're doing a lot of baking. This recipe is super important to me because it's just something as I was kind of raised around, let me see, make sure. Why don't we, if you could spotlight my camera and the counter cam, perfect. So my great aunt Lotte, like she'd come to every high holiday. So Passover, even like Rosh Hashanah, like you don't have meringue cookies typically at Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, but they were my favorite. She would always make them. And I just was obsessed with just like the light, airy crispness of it, in addition to like the combination she'd pack it in chocolate chips and walnuts. So after I got into cooking, I immediately went to her and asked for the recipe and started making it. But over the years, I've begun to not twist it, but like upgrade it with lots of tips and tricks that I've learned from chefs and working in restaurant kitchens. So this is a version. I'm going to talk you through everything. There was one thing that's probably glaring if you're looking at the recipe. We're like, this is kosher for Passover, but there's cornstarch. Just pin in that. We're going to talk about that when we get to it. I have a lot to say, a lot of substitutions, a lot of everything. But to get started, she would always do a French meringue. So just egg whites whipped together, throw in everything. We are going to be adding some more things that make it a little bit more delicious, a little bit more kind of updated in a way that your family's going to like just freak and just be like, this is the meringue cookie that we need to make every year. So in the bowl of a stand mixer, you could see up at the top, there are only like two cameras, myself there. It can go back and forth. If there's any time you want to see one and not the other, you can hit the little three dots in the top right corner and like click pin. But at all times, actually, let's keep it this way. Let's keep the counter cam the main one because my face is, I mean, you can see my face elsewhere. So we have 3 egg whites in a mixer. I'm going to throw in a 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar. You can find Kosher for Passover cream of tartar. This is just a stabilizer, not 100% necessary. It goes to a few drops of lemon juice, but it does help stabilize the meringue so it gets nice and airy, which can be difficult if there's like some humidity, the temperature, how warm your kitchen gets. These are all things that affect everything. So I'm going to start beating this up, and then I'm going to grab a cup of granulated sugar. The granulated sugar is something that I have found is like totally fine. A lot of people feel very strongly about like super fine sugar when they're making meringue, which is true. Like a super fine sugar works really well, but granulated sugar, not an issue. And we're going to use 1 cup of it. And the trick is, I'm just trying to beat the eggs right now, get them a little bubbly, get the cream of tartar incorporated, and we want to start to see some bubbles. We're not making meringue yet. We're not getting anything going. We just want to break up the egg whites. That's very important. And then from here, now that it's starting to get bubbly, I'm going to start to stream in my sugar. Not all at once. We want to stream it in because that way, and as you saw, I started on medium speed. I'm bringing it up to medium high. And as you incorporate your sugar slowly, you're going to be able to get a lot more air. It's going to dissolve a lot easier. And you're not going to shock your egg whites. Okay, that's going to go. We are not looking for this to get to like meringue, even get really any air yet. We just want it to kind of keep going, get nice and frothy. And meanwhile, we are going to talk all about cornstarch. I married a Mizrahi man, and we now like this is totally kosher for Passover for us at least, because of the fact that I don't like the fact that Ashkenazi, Sephardis, Mizrahis eat different law. There are different rules for different communities. We're all Jews, so to each their own. That being said, what I'm doing is I'm going to create a little bit of a starch slurry. I'm using cornstarch. You could use an equal amount of potato starch. You could use an equal amount of tapioca starch. You could truly use any starch, 2 teaspoons. All this is going to do is help really create a nice glossy meringue that's going to bake really matte, and it's going to be super stable. It just helps it like dry out, hold together. Really, really, really a great trick whenever you're making a meringue is use some kind of starch slurry. So what a slurry means is I got a little saucepan here. I'm going to throw in 2 teaspoons of my starch. We'll grab a measuring cup, and we're going to grab 1/3 of a cup of water. Make sure it's measured. And what we're going to do is we're just going to cook these 2 things together over medium heat just to thicken it. And what this is going to do, it's going to become like goop. That's the only way to describe it. It's going to look like glue. Not very appetizing, but it's going to be incredibly, incredibly helpful in terms of your meringue. So I'm going to bump up my speed a little bit just to start to get a little bit more volume. As you can see, sugar's incorporated. It's nice and like pale white. And what we're waiting for is to start to kind of like get some air in and begin to like show like the beginning phases of like not even soft peaks, but just like the meringue is starting. And meanwhile, I'm just stirring my starch. You always want to mix your starch and your water when they're cold, because as soon as you add heat, it's going to start to set, and we do not want that, or else we'll get clumps, and we do not want clumps. So I'm just stirring up my starch mixture. This is going, and then we add everything in. The key part is that like using any type of hot substance in a meringue is actually great because you can't overmix it really. Compared to like a French meringue in which you really can overbeat your egg whites and they'll fall apart. If you do it this way, it's truly, truly a little bit more foolproof. You'll find like other forms, like a Italian meringue or Swiss meringue, which have different forms of either cooking the eggs over a double boiler or pouring in a hot sugar syrup. It's the same thing. It really just affects the chemistry. So you're able to get a lot more air incorporated and really just let it go without worrying about the texture getting grainy. So if you take a look on the other camera, we're starting to see it thicken up nicely. It's gonna go from this like pale white to almost translucent over here. And as soon as that is nice and thick, I'm gonna literally pour it in. We're gonna be pouring in this hot starch slurry. Again, that was 2 teaspoons of cornstarch or 2 teaspoons of potato starch or 2 teaspoons of tapioca starch, depending on however you'd like to celebrate. But this is thick. And I'm going to just pour it right in while it's going. You can see it's starting to get a little bit of that air in. And I'm gonna bump the speed up. Totally fine that we're adding in the hot mixture to the egg whites because it's mixing. You don't have to worry about anything scrambling. All this is gonna do is start to break down the proteins in the egg white so that you get a very, very velvety, delicious meringue. So now that I added that in, I'm gonna go in with the bane of my mother's existence, salt. Salt is very important, especially when you're adding so much sugar. I put in a full teaspoon. And then, that was correct, yeah. And then a teaspoon of vanilla extract as well. Again, if you like, let's say, almonds, you could do almond extract. You could play around as much as you'd like with everything. So this is going. I'm gonna let that just keep on whisking until it gets to stiff peaks, cool down completely. And meanwhile, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about the recipe as I chop some walnuts and chocolate, which is what we're doing. My Aunt Lotte used chocolate chips. I started using chopped chocolate bars. I find that they work, they're just really delicious, and you end up with like a little bit more gooiness, which I think is really lovely. So let me grab a cutting board and my walnuts. And I write about this in the book. A huge part of the book is like my exploration of my connection to Judaism and Jewish identity. And my Aunt Lotte, like, we were close in terms she would come to all the holidays. She was much older. She was my great grandfather's sister-in-law. So she was truly one of the matriarchs of the family. But it was something that it wasn't until she passed in 2019 to one of the devices be muted. This device is muted. There's actually only that one. It's probably just a mixer. Let's see. No real way to move that over. But hopefully I step away a little bit. So when she died in 2019 and at the services, it was when I kind of learned a lot about her history in Europe. I knew she was from Germany. I never knew that she, again, had to wear a star and was turned away for education and eventually was able to flee to London, in which she was mistreated as a maid before she met my grandfather and made her way to the States to build our family and learned that a lot of her family had perished. And to me, it was just, the book has been very emotional because it's created this opportunity for me to really explore Judaism a little bit deeper. And a lot of that has to do with the way that the food and the way that it's traveled to America is connected to my family, their histories, and likewise with my husband's family, as I've learned more about him and the experience of the Iraqi Jews with the Farhud in Iraq, and then my mother-in-law's experience with the revolution in Iran, and it's just wild. And my generation is so beyond blessed to not have to really know those types of traumas, but at the same time, that's why I feel like it's so much more important that I feel this not I feel this responsibility to make sure that all of these stories and these recipes are preserved, because it's just, no matter what your connection to Judaism is, this is a connection to family and something a little bit deeper and at least more important to me. So I'm chopping up about a cup of chopped dark chocolate and a cup of chopped walnuts. And again, let's say you don't like dark chocolate, you could use milk chocolate. So you only have chips, you could use chocolate chips. My biggest thing when you are prepping for Passover is to remember, Dayenu, whatever you do is enough. Do not stress, especially this year. This is our second pandemic Seder. Really, you just gotta do whatever it is that's not gonna stress you out and gonna allow you to hopefully see a few more people this year than last. All right. I'm chopping this. Again, we're looking for really stiff peaks on that meringue. I don't need, like, you want to be checking it, but it's not by any means. Here, let's take a look. Looks really gorgeous. I'm going to let it go a little bit longer, but we're pretty much there. Nice, glossy. This is what happens when you add that starch slurry. One of those really magical chemistry things that makes your life so much better. And the best part is then you can also eat the batter and not worry about it because you added the hot slurry, and that cooks the egg whites enough that it's not really an issue in terms of that. And you can also use pasteurized if you would like to. Okay. Let me grab out. And the trick between stiff peaks, soft peaks, is really like when you pull out your whisk, does the little peak of meringue, does it stick up or does it droop over? Does it feel soft? Is there a little bit of flow to it? Or is it something, it doesn't have to be like straight up in the air, but it should be like, there's a little bit of rigidity. All right, this looks perfect. That is what I'm talking about. Nice stiff peaks. Got a little rubber spatula. Fall. Now I'm going to go in and just add right in the walnuts and chocolate chips. Oh, great question. Did I start with my egg whites at room temperature or from the fridge? I like to take them out. I don't think they need to be room temperature. They just shouldn't be ice cold. Pull them out 10 minutes before you start baking. Another thing you could do is pop them in a little bowl of room temperature water just for 5 minutes, just to take off the chill. I find that it's not going to make or break your meringue, but what it does do is it makes it a little bit easier for the egg whites to break down. All right, so now I'm literally just folding in the chocolate and walnuts. You got to work quickly now because you have to remember, what is the enemy of meringue? I do not have a gefilte fish in my book. That's actually one of the things that unfortunately was never passed down to my grandmother. It was a recipe, so she never made it. Her mother did make it. It's also one of those things that maybe for the next book, but I also love just supporting a lot of incredible local people who make, I would say, gefilteria. If you can find their gefilte fish, it is amazing. Amazing. So the enemy of meringue is fat. So the thing you need to make sure of is that you work quickly once you add in your walnuts and chocolate because they both have fat. Another thing, you got to make sure that your bowl is very, very clean. You got to make sure you soap and water, clean out your bowl because any fat in it won't really get nice and airy. I love that the questions are coming in. I'm gonna start scooping. I use a little ice cream scoop. I find it makes it the easiest and clean. So then, boom, you can also use 2 spoons, but this is really, really easy way to get nice, like little 2 tablespoon size meringue cookies. So the slurry part, you're gonna add your starch and so 2 teaspoons of starch and 1/3 of a cup of water. You're gonna cook it over medium high heat until it sets into a nice thick, glossy, like paste. And typically I do 2 trays and I do a dozen per. Today I'm gonna do them all on 1 tray because I'm feeling a little lazy. But the key is you wanna give just a little space, only an inch. It's not gonna spread, it's mainly just gonna do it. And now let's talk about baking. So I find that 200 degrees is the sweet spot if you want like really nice, beautiful white meringues. I think like there's something so magical when you're able to have the color so perfectly preserved and it's like that snowy white. So I find that 200 degrees for 2 hours is key. And then when I was making this recipe, I tried 2 things. I tried what happens when you like finish baking and you crack open the door or put in the wooden spoon, which is like a trick that a lot of people would do, or just take them out. And I found that actually baking this recipe at 200 degrees, given the cornstarch and all the stabilizers, I could pull it right out from the oven and just let it cool and they're perfect. So just something to keep in mind. But again, every family has their own traditions. This is just mine. And I think like even the slurry part, like you could omit that whole thing and the rest of it would still come out great. I believe that the most important part of like Passover is the concept of Dayenu, of like whatever it would have been enough. And obviously that the song is referring to like miracles of the Exodus, but I think you could use that in your everyday life of whatever you do in the kitchen in terms of prepping for the meal, like the way that you cook, all of it, whatever you do, it is enough. It should be something that brings joy to people and not stress. All right. And you could do these smaller if you'd like to. A lot of people love like the little mini like kisses. I just started making them bigger because I just love when they get nice and crisp on the outside and they stay a little bit chewy and marshmallowy on the inside, which I find is a lot easier when you have these nice 2 tablespoon size scoops. Gorgeous. Can you bake more than 1 tray at a time? Yes, 100%. So I typically do 2 trays at a time. And again, I'm also not like, I open the oven. It's not gonna kill it. So halfway through, I'll switch the trays. And or sometimes I don't, and they'll still turn out fine if your oven is well. The most important thing is you gotta make sure they're in the center racks. A lot of people just bake it at the like top rack and it's closest to the heating element and like you're just never going to get that beautiful meringue if you cook it on the top or if you cook it at the bottom. If you cook it on the bottom, then the bottoms are going to get crispy golden. If you cook it on the top, then the tops are going to get golden. We don't want this. Just tasting for control. All right. Somebody asked, oh, so how long? 200 degrees, 2 hours. That's it. You can't make these late at night. I mean, this is a perfect time for the event because now I could take it out right before I get into bed. Those go in. And we're just going to wait around, right? No, I'm kidding. Okay, I have soft hats. Someone asked, I have a friend who talks about incredible hamantash he has in New York that uses a yeast dough. I thought it was just a short dough. Is she imagining it? Different communities use different types of dough. I've seen yeast at hamantashen. I have seen the majority use like a short dough. That's what I use. But same thing with rugelach. In Israel, you'll find rugelach with a yeast dough. So love the variations, ever to each their own. Forgotten cookies, turn off the heat and then let it in the oven overnight. You can do that with these cookies in terms of cooking for 202 hours, turning off the heat and leaving them in the oven overnight. The difference is that if you do that, these will be like crispy, crispy, crispy all the way through. I like a little bit of chew. That's just like a personal preference. So it really depends on your taste and whatever you like. Yeah, if you like them really like crisp and airy, go for it. Did I preheat? Yes, you got to preheat the oven. 200 degrees. I always preheat at least 20 minutes. I want preheated for 20 minutes before I put anything in. Because if it just like, it dings like, oh, it's preheated, and then I pop them in, it's not really at that temperature yet. And then I might turn on the heating element because you open the door, and then that can like mess up the way that it bakes. Is this doable using a hand mixer? 100%. Definitely don't do this by hand. But a hand mixer, yes, it's going to take a little bit more time than your average meringue because of the fact that you're adding hot liquid. So it's going to like need to cool down and then get more air in. But that's all something that's totally fine. Really, like, you can do this with whatever you got. If you like other types of mix-ins, go for it. Truly, don't be afraid to like make these your own depending on what it is. If you worked really quickly, you could even like make these like funfetti and swirl in sprinkles, but they'll bleed very quickly. But play around with different types of chocolate. You can even do like dried fruit. These are some ones I made earlier, and they become like gorgeous. You see how like nice and white they are? I mean, it looks yellow because of my lighting, but they are very light. And they are like, they're so good. The texture of the chocolate and the walnuts, they make a mess everywhere, which I love. Reminds me of my childhood. It's like a really, 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 really lovely Passover sweet that you could really make all year round. To remind, we started with the 3 egg yolks, 3 egg yolks, not 3 egg whites, not egg yolks. 3 egg whites with a 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar. Whip that up, streamed in a cup of sugar, made a little slurry, 2 teaspoons of either cornstarch or potato starch with a 1/3 cup of water. Cook it for a few minutes. Stream it in with a teaspoon of salt and vanilla. Add in your chocolate and walnuts. Scoop it, bake. Oh, we just added it back in. Amazing. How long do they stay fresh? So these are a bit past their prime because they're a week old. I say that meringues in an airtight container will last for about 3 days. I'd say 3 days is like the prime window. The factors: humidity, how hot is your kitchen, how airtight is the container you store them in. These can make it that your meringues are either rock hard or melt into mush in a day, or they could stay fresh for 4 days, depending if it's a chillier Pesach than the weather we've been seeing even in New York. These are all things that affect the meringue shelf life. Typically, I make them the day before I'm serving them. That way they're done, out of sight, out of mind, still going to be perfect. And that way, like, it's one less thing you have to do for Seder, but at the same time, they're fresh. I have a lot of really great kosher for Passover desserts in the book. I have a, here, let's see. These are the ones that everyone's been very excited about. These are my macaroon brownies. It's a brownie that's thickened with coconut flour and then topped with coconut macaroon. I just posted on my Instagram today a flourless charoset cake that uses almond flour. That's really, really yummy and kind of like very, very Pesach forward. Was the water room temperature or cold? Doesn't matter. We're throwing this on the stove. The most important thing is it's not hot. Can't be warm or hot because that'll start to seize up the starch and make it clumpy. So you want to use either cold or room temp. Citrus would work really well. Zest, you could only do the zest, but yes, when you fold it in like the dark chocolate and walnuts, a little bit of orange zest would be delicious. And that would a perfect example of things that you could do. Let's say you want to take this into a Middle Eastern theme. You could have done chopped dates and apricots and pistachios instead of vanilla streamed in rose water. That would be delicious. I just thought of that, and honestly, I might do that in my next book now because that sounds really good. the possibilities are truly, truly endless. The most important things are the ratios, that you put in enough sugar. You can't cut the sugar in half because you're like, oh, I need to cut back on the sugar. Like, no, that affects everything because this is chemistry. You can't swap in stevia. You can't swap in coconut sugar. You need sugar. Can you leave out the cream of tartar? 100%. Or you could also add in, I think the swap is like a quarter teaspoon of lemon juice. You throw in a quarter teaspoon of lemon juice, that'll do the same thing in terms of starting the process of making sure it's nice and stable, and then starting to break down the proteins in the egg whites. So a million and one things that you can do, but you can also find kosher for Passover cream of tartar. So in today's world, like if you got it, flaunt it. That's always really nice. And then I'm happy to answer any questions about anything in general, even not related to this recipe, just because I'm here and I love to chat. Any other Passover recipes in the cookbook? I have a full Passover menu. So I have 2 brisket recipes, a very, very delicious matzo ball soup recipe. I'm a big believer, it's a roasted chicken matzo ball soup. So I roast chicken legs with vegetables for like 30 minutes in the oven, and then I pop that on the stove and make that into the broth. So the whole broth comes together in an hour, which is really great. And then the balls are like perfect. They're perfect. They're just they're like a great size. They're fluffy, great, like a good amount of density, but they're not like, I always say they're like in between like the sinker and the floater. So I really love that recipe. I have a salted honey chopped liver that is really, 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 really good. And the desserts. So I have the coconut macaroon brownies. Also, my sister-in-law's mother, her birthday often falls on Seder. I wanted to create something so she could have a cake. She could have like a birthday cake. And to me, it's like the flourless chocolate cakes were always so sad. I created a flourless almond layer cake. I'll show you because it's like, it just looks like a birthday cake. I have these rainbow cookies, use almond flour. They're kosher for Passover. I have some also, since my husband is Mizrahi, like I have these Iraqi almond cookies called hajibada, also kosher for Passover. This is matzah masu, what you call tiramisu, matzah tiramisu, really delicious. Not going to work if you're parv, but if you're into the dairy, this is like the most delicious thing ever. Kosher Passover. It's also could be like, say, you need gluten-free too. Just use gluten-free matzah. It's still good. And then this is a kosher for Passover cake, if you would believe it. It's a flourless almond cake with chocolate buttercream. I wanted to create a lot of recipes that would work for the holidays, and just like add sweetness. The whole reason of Passover, it's such a wonderful opportunity to gather with your loved ones and have a meaningful conversation about systems of oppression and the value of freedom. And this motif of sweet things are so much sweeter when layered over the bitterness of our history and bondage. And to me, that's why like I want to make sure that my Seder menu is always super special, because I want people to be engaged and excited and looking forward every year to Passover. And the briskets, I think the idea of hint on brisket recipe. I have 2 briskets. One is this roasted tomato brisket. I grew up with tomato, with like, it was a very tomato heavy brisket, which I love. And so what I started doing is roasting whole peeled tomato, like canned tomatoes, and roasting to like start to caramelize them and build up flavor before I made the braise. The other one is a French onion brisket, very, very, very delicious, very rich. Both are amazing. The trick's to brisket: keep the fat cap on. You want to like render all that fat in the braise, and then skim it later. Let it cool, chill it overnight. You gotta pop it in the fridge. You should only be slicing cold brisket. The next day, you could pop off that fat cap and save it for roasting potatoes or discard it, whatever you want. And then slice up your brisket, throw it back in the sauce, pop it on the stove, and now your oven is free and your brisket is done. And to me, that is the secret to perfect brisket every year. How old were you when you saw you loved cooking? Is there a recipe for these cookies? Yes. So I know they keep dropping the ingredient list. The full recipe is in my cookbook. Um, the Persian, in terms of how I got very into it in high school. I think that's when I really showed like a true interest, and I wanted to pursue it professionally. That's what I did. Toddy, crispy Persian rice, absolutely delicious. It should take about 2 hours total, because and the one of those hours is just because you got to soak the rice for an hour. Soak the rice for an hour, and then you start it, and it doesn't take too long. You par cook it for 5 minutes. You make the rest of the stuff. You assemble it. You cook it for about 30 minutes, and then you're done. Amazing. Toddy, one of my favorite things ever. Favorite restaurant you worked at CIA? It was an old restaurant, doesn't exist anymore, called St. Andrews, that I adored, but I also love the American Bounty. Really, really, really love the American Bounty. That was a fun one to work at. Tariq is the best. It's like, I love it all. I love Ashkenazi food. I love Mizrahi food. Do you have any other favorite cookbooks? So I have a whole section on like, there are a lot of Jewish cookbooks over here, and I would say Sababa by Dina Sussman is one of my favorites. All of Leah Koenig's books, her latest one, the Jewish cookbook, is like very thorough. I love Mike Solomonov's books. One of my favorites that cover like Eastern Europe, Eastern European foods, specifically the Ukraine and the countries touching it. My friend Olia Hercules, she has a book called Mamushka, as well as Caucasus and Summer Kitchens. Really incredible like look into the foods of Eastern Europe. And then like in terms of Persian food, Food of Life by Najmieh Batmanglij is like that's the golden standard. Favorite ethnic cuisine? Jewish food. I think that's my favorite thing is the fact that like the Jewish community really touches the whole world, and you can do research and learn about what Jews in Ethiopia eat, and how the Jews of Syria and Jews of Lebanon and Jews of across the Levant, of Iraq and Iran and India, all of those stories of how they cook around Jewish ritual, around Shabbat, around Pesach, around Rosh Hashanah, around Yom Kippur, around all the other holidays, using their local ingredients, the flavors of their region. To me, that is what's so exciting about Jewish food. Favorite cooking gadgets for like squeezing lemons. I mean, squeezing the lemons, I think everyone should have a microplane for fine zest, for citrus, very important. Everyone should have lots of tongues. Everyone should have, I have it here, a little dirty, but little offset spatula. To me, I use this every day. Everything from flipping to spreading, everything, I use this. I have not been to triplets. I'm not sure. Polish potato bread called uba. I have not, but I love that. To me, that's my favorite. Oh, baba? Baba, I have not. Or buba? I don't know. But now I would like to learn about it. I think that's the best part, is learning about that, and then going to like my family and being like, hey, have you heard of blank? Perfect example is like, I never heard of cholent until I started studying Jewish food. My mother never heard of cholent. And when I was doing the book, I called my grandmother one day. I was like, hey, it's like, Mom's never heard of cholent before. Like, did you grow up with cholent? And she was like, yeah, of course. My mother made cholent. She would have the carp in the back club for making gefilte fish, all this stuff. And I was like, why didn't you make it? And she's like, oh, well, when I met your grandfather, he was a secular Jew, and I would stop being kosher. And it was as simple as like, that was the difference. And to me, I think the conversation over being secular or not is like, that's fine. I don't, because I'm not, again, I'm relatively secular, that's not where I pass judgment, but I was just so disappointed in like the fact that all those recipes were lost. Like, that's what kills me. But there's plenty more plenty more deep dives to do in the world of Jewish food, a lot more dishes, a lot more stories. To me, the fact that like this one's tied to my great great aunt, we'll have the Iraqi almond cookies are from my husband's great great aunt. To have these things tied to our families and preserve them on for generations to come, that is the most important thing in everything I do. Truly, truly, truly. And that's what means the world to me.
Jake, thank you so much. We have all not only learned so much, but we are all going to gain quite a bit of weight over the Passover holiday. I actually did screenshot your flourless haroset cake because that's something that's going to be added to my menu. And even a thought, everyone always has leftover haroses. What a great way to use up what's on the Seder plate, especially for all our gluten-free people, because that's the basis for a great cake. So everyone has been asking all these great questions, and I really appreciate you, being here with us tonight. I know it's before Pesach, so you're probably quite busy because I'm sure people are asking you to help cook their Seder. So I really do want to thank you, and I want to let everyone know Jake has been so generous, not only with his time, but he's also donated cookbooks so that anyone who makes a donation of $100 or more to the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center will be getting a signed cookbook. Now my Jake is not signed, so I'll have to buy another cookbook. So I have one with the signature. See, and I thought I was doing the smart thing by pre-ordering. So now I'll just have to make sure we get to meet so I can get your signature on them.
For sure.
The Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, what we really do is use the lessons, and we teach the lessons of the Holocaust to teach young children and adults what happens when we allow manifestations of hate. And in every community, we have seen manifestations of hate, most recently in the Asian American community, the rise in anti-Semitism. And what we've been finding is that really food is the one thing that unites all of us. And we really have to find things that we have more in common than what sets us apart. And I think I actually wanted to say that I love the name of your book, and I did write to you a few days ago about your forward. So anyone who orders the book, even though it would be tempting to go right to the recipes, I actually did take time to read the forward, and I have to say my eyes were too full of tears to actually look at the recipes, because it was such a beautiful way to look at building a Jewish home in a non-traditional way. So I want to encourage everyone, whatever your level of observance, even if you're not Jewish, having people around your table and having that meal where you welcome people to the table is so important, not only in our religion, but to bring people together. That people, when we talk about breaking bread, there's a reason. And I think that this is the best way to bring all different cultures together, is over a plate of food. And, we like to say that Jewish people have been enjoying Chinese food for over 4,000 years. You will turn the tables a little bit, and you will find a lot of people buying this book, Jewish. I happen to love it. I loved everything about it. And for me, I'm reading it almost as a novel, because every recipe has a little bit of you in it. So I thank you. You need to add that to the ingredients. Everything has a little bit of Jake in it. So thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And again, we will provide the recipe. And I encourage you, I think Jake in his own way is a bridge builder, that you're building a bridge between different cultures. And I think that's the most important thing we can do as humans. So, kol hakavod, toda rabah, chag sameach, and have a wonderful, wonderful Passover, everyone. If you're celebrating Easter, trust me, a lot of these recipes will be just as delicious on your Easter table. And just thank you for enjoying and coming together with us. So thank you.
Thank you. So
have
incredible.
A great evening. This was incredible. And I hope that one day we can do this in person. Zoom has opened up a world for us, but we're still craving human contact. So
100%.
Hopefully very soon we will be able to see each other in person. I want to thank everybody. And Jake, thank you. Who's offering to clean Jake's kitchen tonight?
It's all good. All good. I got it. Pleasure.
Thank you
Thank you,
so
everyone.
much.
Have a
You
great
have been
night.
amazing. And have a good evening, everybody. Thank you.